Are Subarus as bad as the internet makes them out to be?
Head gaskets, Ringlands, sunroof editions, broken transmissions, and spontaneous combustion.
So I'm sure you guys see it all the time on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, all of these things that people say are wrong with Subarus and why these engines are trash and why these cars are trash. And I know some of you are gonna jump down in the comments and immediately start calling these cars terrible, trash, terrible platforms, they're god awful, they're the worst cars ever made. I figured we'd go through, we'd talk about the actual failure points of these cars, the actual defects of them, how to correct those defects, and kind of squash some of the myths that you guys might hear online. Why not? Let's just start with the main driver that everyone says that's wrong with Subarus, and that's head gaskets. With head gasket problems, do Subarus have head gasket problems? It's kind of a yes and no question. For the typical turbo Subaru like this, no, they do not have the typical head gasket Subaru problem. Whenever someone's like, oh my gosh, Subarus, they blow head gaskets all the time, that's simply not true. Subarus do have head gasket problems, but only the early model naturally aspirated 2.5 liter models. This is an OEM Subaru turbo head gasket. They use these on a lot of things now. Even naturally aspirated cars will go over to using these. There's absolutely nothing wrong with these head gaskets. We use these on pretty much everything. The issue with the head gasket failure is on early model naturally aspirated 2.5 liters. They didn't use an MLS head gasket like this one. If you don't know what an MLS, or if you don't know what MLS stands for, it's multi-layer steel. If you look closely at this head gasket, you'll notice there's a couple different layers of steel in there that comprise that head gasket up. On early model naturally aspirated 2.5 liters, they use something more of like a cardboardy, paper, Velcro type of head gasket. And obviously you put those on any car, they're going to leak over time. It's just, they're prone to it. They're not gonna seal well. The MLS gaskets with the graphite coating on them like these ones have, if you look around like all of the sealing boards and everything like that, you'll see all this like nice little gray graphite coating on there. Those seal up just fine. Now, am I saying that turbo model Subarus don't leak head gaskets or don't have leaking head gaskets or any of that stuff? No, it's not what I'm saying at all. Any car out there is subject to a head gasket failure. Toyota, BMW, Mazdas, Subarus, any car can experience head gasket failures for numerous reasons. If you're pushing too much boost and you don't have the proper head gaskets, you don't have O-rings or things like that, obviously you can lift ahead and start pushing coolant. If you just neglect your car, you beat on it all the time, then obviously further issues may stem from that. But to say that all Subarus have head gasket problems is just simply not true. I have a piston right there, hang on. So some of you guys are gonna recognize what this is. It's a piston and rod. It's a Manley H-Tough Plus connecting rod with a CP piston. Ringland failure and Subarus. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm not saying it's not a problem, because it very much well is a problem on specific year ranges. Not every Subaru is subject to experiencing Ringland failure or is prone to it. So in 2009 up to 2018, you may have seen the class action lawsuit from people suing Subaru over a known defect in some of the 2.5 and FA20 engines, going through the fact that they were experiencing Ringland failure at early models. I think the courts determined that 120,000 miles is what you should get out of a manufacturer's engine, and some people were getting anywhere between like 30 and 80,000. So that year range, it spans 9 years, almost 10 years. And that's why 2018 plus OEM cars that are still all factory a little bit more desirable. In 2018, Subaru did swap over to using the Type RA short block that came out of the Type RAs that they released in the States as their standard block. That could have been from the fact that they were trying to correct the Ringland problem on these 09 to 17 model years or 18 model years, whatever it may have been. And this is a Type RA short block. It's nothing special. It's still a stock OEM block. I've made decent power on these things. A lot of people have made decent power on these things. Now, the only difference you're gonna see between something like this Type RA short block that's next to me and an older 09 to 17 STI short block is the piston. Everything else is pretty much identical to it. I think there's a slightly different metallurgy in it, but that's not what we're really focusing on. The pistons are cast. They're obviously not forged like anything else. I mean, anything will break if you put enough heat or stress on it. The fact that they're cast pistons, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The issue was on these 09 to 18 model year pistons, the Ringland design was inadequate on the piston, which was causing them to crack. And there are some other determining factors from that year range, which may play into that, which we will get into in a little bit. Now, if you're one of the unfortunate ones to experience this Ringland failure in one of these cars, the solution to that is obviously either build the block, replace the block, X, Y, or Z. Personally, I suggest using RA blocks if you're not looking for any crazy power, you just want to get your car back on the road. They're an awesome, affordable option that we personally have seen them hold good power and longevity out of them. Obviously, they're not built motors. They're not going to make 5, 6, 700 wheel horsepower all day long, but they're a good alternative. Ringlands, they can be an issue. I guess I need this still for this next one. Spun bearings. Let's talk about that, because people like to attribute Subarus to spinning bearings all the time, and that's not typically the case. There has to be something to cause a bearing to spin. Bearings don't just spin on their own. They don't just decide to wake up one day and break. There has to be some underlying cause that's going to cause bearing damage and cause the bearing to spin, get rod knock, things like that. That can be inadequate oiling, lack of maintenance, lack of doing oil changes, abusing a car past the point of what it's built for, bad tunes, inadequate part selection. I mean, there's a whole slew of things that can cause bearing failure. But with any engine out there, it's an air pump. They don't just wake up one day and they're like, I'm not gonna work anymore. There's some and always an underlying cause that would cause a bearing to spin. So they don't just wake up one day and spin a bearing. There's always some external issue that's going to cause it. Do I have a turbo? I do have a turbo here, hang on. Turbocharger stuff. Premature turbo failure is something that I've seen brought up. I have never seen on any of the customer vehicles I've worked on any of the 40 plus of these cars I've owned, premature turbo failure. I've had ones that range from 20,000 miles, brand new, up to 140, 160, 200,000 miles. I've never experienced one with premature turbo failure. Like I said, just like the spun bearing, there's always going to be an external cause as to why one of these will die. This is obviously not an OEM turbo, it's a Grimspeed turbo, but beside the fact, they don't just destroy themselves. There's always something that's going to cause it. One example that I will agree with that can have premature turbo failure is on early model 2-liter WRXs. For some reason, Subaru decided to put a catalytic converter in the up pipe. Now, if you don't know what an up pipe is, this is your up pipe. This bottom side goes to the exhaust manifold. The top side goes to your turbo right there. Now, for some reason, Subaru thought it'd be a good idea to put a cat in this. I'm guessing it's for some type of emissions reasons. It was only ever on the 2 liters, but because they put a catalytic converter in these up pipes, you're putting a cat. And obviously, once a catalytic converter gets to higher mileage, they start to break up, especially if you start pushing them a little bit and they get really hot over time. And then you're gonna start shooting catalytic converter material into a turbo, and that will 100% kill a turbo. But the turbos don't just fail. There's always some external reason, whether it's a bearing failure caused by something, you get metal in the oiling system, it contaminates the CHRA, and then it kills one of these. But premature turbo failure, personally, I haven't seen any of them with premature turbo failure. But apparently people are saying that's an issue. I've just never seen it. If you do experience a turbo failure though, swap to something bigger. Like, that's the only reasonable option, right? Here's one that genuinely is a problem, and I try to talk about this in modification videos. PCV systems on Subarus are absolute trash. They are garbage. Now, in the Subaru class action lawsuit that we talked about with the Ringland failure, they did mention in that there is a known PCV issue which can cause pre-ignition and detonation, and that is when things can get a little destructive for things like this. As your piston and rod comes up, there is a gas layer that protects the crown of the piston. When you have pre-ignition and detonation, things like that, that destroys the gas layer because it's burning it off prematurely. When that gas layer gets destroyed and then you have a combustion cycle, all that heat and everything that was getting protected by that gas layer is now gone. So all of that rushes down to the piston, and that is what can cause ringlands to crack. So it was a combination of inadequate piston design as well as pre-ignition and detonation, which would kill these things pretty quickly. And that is, I am not going to even deny it, 100% a problem on 09s to 18s or 17s as per specified in that class action lawsuit. Especially if you're like during WOT, like a wide open throttle pull, or you're doing like hard launches and things like that, that'll 100% kill these things really quickly if you get one of those pre-ignition events. So obviously solutions to that, have a good tune on the car. If you're gonna run it as OEM as possible, I would at least suggest you put an IAG air oil separator on there. What that's gonna do is it's just gonna clean up the PCV system a lot. It's gonna keep all the oil from going into the intake tract, the turbo, the intercooler, things like that, and it won't be pushing that oil into the combustion chamber through the intake tract, so that way it's not going to be denaturing the fuel, bringing down your octane rating and things like that. So That's just one that I highly advise for a lot of people. If you're gonna be doing these, that is a known problem. That is an issue. That's one of the first things I suggest to literally anybody who gets one of these cars, throw an AOS on these things. Now, as I was editing that video, there was one major one that I had missed. I haven't put on my same jacket, so that way you couldn't tell it's a different day. But with older Subarus and some of the newer ones, there are some significant oil system problems. WRXs, STIs, Foresters, any turbo model vehicle, Subaru used to put filters inside of the banjo bolts that would go towards all of the oil feed lines that ran on top of the engine. Problem with those is that the filters would get clogged and then they would block oil flow to things like turbochargers, AVCS cam gears, anywhere that oil needed to go. So on the older models, that is 100% a problem. If you have an older one and you're doing a rebuild or something along those lines, or you ever have those oil lines off, you look inside of the banjo bolt, get a small pick, and you can just pull those filters right out. Now the other one we're gonna talk about is the oil pan setup and the pickup and things like that. It has been somewhat known that the stock oil pickups do have a tendency to crack. They are brazed, they're not even welded. It's not a drastic, significant, oh my God, this is something I need to address right now, but it is a small issue to be aware of. Baffling in the pans, it's pretty bad for anything outside of using the car as a daily driver. If you have any intentions of using the car for any type of motorsports use, spirited driving, I highly recommend upgrading to a baffled oil pan. Or even just an OEM pan with like a Killer Bee oil pickup, windage tray. IAG makes them. A lot of people make them, but that's one of the more known issues that I feel like is prevalent. Like with mine, I've gone above and beyond redoing the entire oil system. I'm adding in this giant set wrap oil cooler, an AccuSump, a ton of stuff to be able to get my oil system proper. Those are some things to be aware of. If you're using your WRX, your STI, your Legacy GT, your turbo model, anything along those lines, it's just a daily driver, or maybe you just do light spirited drives on the weekends and things like that, I wouldn't focus on it too much, but that is one to be aware of. Now, last one on this list is the WRX transmissions. I'm leaving out the STI transmissions because they are robust, they are beefy, they can take power. My old 750 wheel horsepower WRX had a STI 6-speed swap in it. Thing took all the abuse all the time. I want to say it made like 630 foot-pounds of torque. Never gave me a single issue. Stock transmission, stock axle, stock drivetrain, stock diff. But the WRX 5-speed and 6-speeds. The 6-speeds are going to be in the 2015 plus WRX with the FA20 and the 2022 plus WRX with the FA24. The 5-speed WRX transmissions are going to be in the 2002 up to the 2014. Known problem. I don't even know if it's I wouldn't even call it a problem, but a known issue. If you do want to make power on those 5-speed and 6-speed WRXs, be prepared for them to explode, because they will explode. When they do explode, you got three options. You can put another stock one back in. You can build the 5-speed, which I really don't recommend unless you just really like the gearing in the 5-speed, but it's just as expensive, if not more expensive, than doing the STI 6-speed swap. So I would just say do the STI 6-speed swap if you are going to do it. You can strengthen the 5-speeds a bit with more blast. I don't think Moore makes them anymore, but there was a company called Moore, and they would make blast plates. And the problem with the Subaru 5-speed and 6-speeds is they're split case designs. The cases bolt together with all the gears inside of them and whatnot. If you are someone who does have a 5-speed or 6-speed WRX and you do want to push for power, just be prepared for that 5 or 6-speed to blow up. And when it does blow up, just evaluate your options for what you want to do. That is a fairly known, I feel like at this point it's a fairly known thing for WRXs for people who want to try to modify them. I think that's all the major stuff. I've seen some like small things that I don't feel like it's worth touching on. People have said that Subarus are hard to tune, which is straight up wrong. That's a lie. They're pretty easy. There's plenty of tuning options for them. You can make great power on them. You can do anything from stock to 1,000 plus. I've seen things saying that they're complicated and hard engines to work on. I'm gonna be honest, this is probably the easiest engine you will ever work on. It may look intimidating at first, but it's no difficult than anything else. Honestly, I think it's a little bit easier than any other engine because everything's readily accessible and readily available and easy to service. Wait, okay, well, you know, I'll give it to you that. Spark plugs, they may not be the easiest thing, but after you've done them a couple times, they're really not that bad. There's no extra amount of vacuum lines or vacuum hoses than anything you'd find on anything else. So I mean, overall, they're not as bad as people make them out to be on the internet. The internet hypes them up, which I don't care. You guys want to keep hyping them up, making them sound bad, that's fine. I'll keep buying them for cheap. I got no problems with that. But at the end of the day, they do have their issues just like any other car. No car out there is perfect and problem-free. Every single car you have, every single car you'll ever buy, they're probably gonna be known for having X, Y, or Z issues. But that's all I got for you guys on this one. These cars are not as problematic or as hard or as temperamental as the internet makes them out to be. You guys can go back literally anywhere on my channel and see that EJs are relatively easy engines to work on, relatively easy engines to build, to assemble, to install, to make power on, to tune with. They are easy. They are not scary. If you do the right precautions and you want to make power, then you shouldn't have any problems. If you just want to leave it stock, put on an AOS, call it a day, and just enjoy the car like that, and it shouldn't give you any real issues as long as you stay on top of your normal maintenance routines. Because that's one thing that I've seen with a lot of Subarus, because I buy a lot of them, like this clapped out one. People avoid service intervals for some reason. So if you liked the video, if you learned something new, or if there's anything I missed, go ahead and toss it down in the comments. If you like the video, feel free to hit that like button. If you dislike it, then you can dislike it if you want. If you want to subscribe and you're not already, I'll put it in one of these corners. No idea which one quite yet. But with that, I'll catch you guys in the next one. So peace out, homies. Woo!